the country is the feeling that there are certain areas of American life that used to be off limits for politics, where we didn't feel like we were going to be assaulted based on our politics when we turned on our TV and we watched Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson was studiously anti-political, meaning that he was a Democrat, apparently. He was not a Reagan fan, although he got to know Reagan and ended up liking him. Johnny Carson was a Democrat, but you wouldn't have known that from watching Johnny Carson. Jay Leno was a sort of halfway Republican. You wouldn't have known that from watching him because Jay Leno was studiously non-political. Now all of our late-night hosts have basically become political hacks, and you can see that at work. So last night, Colbert, Kimmel, Fallon, all of them are ardent leftists, and all of them have decided they need to go balls to the wall in pushing for gun control. So here's a mashup of Colbert and Kimmel and Fallon. Here are them talking about Trump's gun proposals.
With the Olympics over, 90 countries have departed South Korea. Yep, 90 groups waving goodbye, or as the NRA calls those, sponsors. And
although gun owners, if you go into almost any business and show them your gun, you get stuff for free. It's really...
Here in reality, there was an armed sheriff's deputy on site, and it made no difference. But Trump even has an explanation for that. The reason a teacher with a handgun would be able to neutralize a shooter with an automatic weapon is because teachers love the kids more. See, this is what happens when we elect a president who thought Paul Blart Mall Cop was a documentary.
It would be ridiculous coming from anyone, but especially from Trump. He's gonna run in? Yo, when Trump ran for president, that was the first time he ran in his entire life. Come on, man.
And so all of the late-night hosts universally talking about how stupid it is to talk about why good people with guns can stop bad people with guns. Of course, this is idiocy. Kimmel's point particularly is incredibly stupid. First of all, he says that the shooter had an automatic weapon. The shooter did not have an automatic weapon. People on the left who are talking about this stuff should at least learn basic terminology so they don't sound like complete morons. But they're not bothering to do that, and it's evident. And all of this is really quite terrible for the level of political discourse in the country, because when you have laughing audiences scoffing at the idea that an armed teacher can save anyone, then and you suggest that maybe we ought to arm more security guards in schools. And Jimmy Kimmel just laughs that off by suggesting that an armed security guard did nothing at this school, even though there are many schools all over the country where armed security guards every day are stopping people with weapons. Like, legitimately, there's armed security guards at I think it's over 50% of schools have some form of armed security. And those armed security guards, metal detectors, there are a lot of weapons that are stopped every year going through those metal detectors. Apparently, Jimmy Kimmel opposes those as well, simply because he thinks that a generalized regime of gun control is better. And then he and Colbert and Fallon, all of them suggest that if you oppose their agenda, which they've not made clear, they haven't exactly said what they want other than mass banning of guns, which is never going to happen. There are 300 million weapons in the country and 100 million rifles. But when they suggest that if you oppose them, this means that you are a bad person. And what's amazing is that they've felt no blowback in the ratings. Now, part of this, I think, is the universality of leftist feeling in late night means that you have no alternative. Right? What are you going to switch from Kimmel to Fallon so you can hear the same gun control messaging? But part of it is also that the ratings are so far down on all of these shows overall that the audience is fragmented. Okay, Jimmy Kimmel's ratings are not anything like what Johnny Carson's ratings used to be, because there are lots of networks. Very few people are actually watching these late-night shows in comparison to the number of people who were watching late-night shows before. So they're really not broadcast. They're narrowcast, even though they're on the networks. And so Jimmy Kimmel can say, in full honesty, that there's no way to go too far in bashing President Trump or the GOP.
Not at all. I don't think you can go too far. I think that, you know, I'm still doing a comedy show and I need to be funny and entertain my audience. But I also think that we've matured enough to the point where we can accept late night talk show hosts speaking about a serious subject. And I think that it's almost necessary now.
Okay, it's almost necessary now for late-night hosts to talk about political subjects? Well, actually, what Jimmy Kimmel has shown is it's necessary for our late-night hosts to study the subjects before they talk about them, because literally every day he says something that's stupid about politics, including in that clip, a very short clip, him talking about automatic weapons being used in the shooting, which, of course, they were not. And it's not just Jimmy Kimmel, unfortunately. The entire media have shown themselves, virtually the entire media have shown themselves to be activists on gun control issues rather than objective journalists. Okay, so today's examples come courtesy of CNN. So CNN has been the worst on this. It's so funny. There are all these folks in the media who are constantly... The fallout from the shooting a couple of days ago continues, as well it should. And again, it's this circular argument that has become highly irritating to everybody involved, in which people on the left scream, do something. People on the right say, well, what would you have us do? And then people on the left say, well, if you're even asking that question, it means you don't want to do something. That seems like the cycle of logic that is applied here. So Jimmy Kimmel, of course, is the leader in being the sort of emotional, the emotional avatar for the left. So he goes on his show last night, and he, of course, talks about the shooting and pushes hard for gun control with his usual caveats and freakouts about the NRA.
Another senseless shooting, this time at a high school in Parkland, Florida, where a gunman, a former student, opened fire yesterday. Again, 17 lives have been lost. More than a dozen people are hospitalized. Tell your buddies in Congress, tell Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and Marco Rubio, all the family men who care so much about their communities, that what we need are laws, real laws, that do everything possible to keep assault rifles out of the hands of people who are going to shoot our kids. Go on TV and tell them to do that. I'm going to tell you something.
Okay, go tell people what to do and what we need laws and what are these laws going to be. And you don't. The Congress works for us. They don't work for the NRA. This is one of the things that he was pushing, the idea that the NRA was responsible. We'll get to that in a minute. Again, all of this is just designed to make you believe that Jimmy Kimmel has a plan. Jimmy Kimmel doesn't have a plan. People on the left don't have a plan. And if they do have a plan, it really is to confiscate guns. Now, the minute that you say that about people on the left, they get very upset. No, we just want reasonable gun legislation. But then they can never name what the reasonable gun legislation is, because if they were to ban assault rifles, the reality is the vast majority of killings that are done with guns in the United States are not with assault rifles. Assault rifles are responsible for less murders in the United States than hands or knives. When people on the left say, well, what if we would just do better background checks? We have full background checks in the state of California, and that has not stopped the Isla Vista shooting. It did not stop the San Bernardino shooting. Again, the problem with these targeted gun laws is that what people on the left really want, if they were honest about it, they would say this. Piers Morgan, when I was on with him in 2013, he refused to say it, but then he finally came out and he was honest about it. What they really want is a UK-style government seizure of vast amounts of guns. That is not going to happen in the United States. They tried it in Australia. They tried a gun buyback program. Only 1/3 of all the guns were turned in Australia. They still have a murder rate in Australia with guns. They still have gun buybacks. It is illegal to own a gun in Australia. And yet people still own guns. 2/3 of the people who owned it before still own it. In the United States, if you were to grandfather in all of the guns that still are there are 300 million guns in the United States. So that would not actually solve the problem you're talking about, because a lot of the guns that are in hands of people who are going to commit school shootings in the future are already in those hands. Right? So you'd actually have to go around confiscating guns. Good luck trying to take guns away from 42% of the American public who say, 42% of households say that there's a gun in the house. Right? There's a gun in my house. Right? The government would have to come to my house and take it from me. I'm not going to offer it back in a government buyback, and neither is anybody else who owns a gun. Those programs are wildly unsuccessful. Another form of bias, Jimmy Kimmel had on, directly after the State of the Union address, the guys from Pod Save America, right? And he had on all of these folks from a left-wing podcast, all former Obama staffers, by the way. And I listen to Pod Save America. I find it amusing, and I think sometimes they have interesting insights. I like to hear a different perspective. But the idea that, would Jimmy Kimmel ever have me on? Ever in a million years? Our listenership is about the same size as Pod Save America's, by the way, because we broadcast more often. So we have the same number of listeners in aggregate that Pod Save America does. Would they even in a million years consider having me on to talk about State of the Union on Jimmy Kimmel? The answer, of course, is no. But they'll have on people who are just as partisan. I'd say more partisan than I am. I mean, I'll hit Trump when I think he's wrong. The Pod Save America guys, I think they actually have a shrine to Barack Obama, and every so often they open up the curtains and they light candles in front of that shrine. It's pretty insane. They were on Jimmy Kimmel the night of the State of the Union address to analyze Trump's State of the Union address. Again, bias in action. And then, Kimmel demonstrates his own bias because he decides that it's time for him to push again. I don't know who died and made Jimmy Kimmel the moral authority in the country. I mean, the guy who used to have women grab his shorts and tell him what was in his pants on the Man Show. Honestly, I feel bad saying all this stuff. Like, I've hit Jimmy Kimmel so many times, but it's his own damn fault. I mean, he feels like a nice person. And I know a lot of people who know Jimmy Kimmel. He's a really nice, genuine fellow. And I feel like he'd be a good guy to hang out with. But this idea that he knows anything about politics or that he's a moral authority is really ridiculous. He can have his opinion. But once he gives his opinion, then I get to knock him for his opinion, because his opinion is just wrong in many of these cases because it's not based on the facts. So in any case, he does a shtick about how dreamers ought to be let in the country, and Obama was nice, and Trump is cruel. Never mind the fact that Trump is about to let in 3 times as many dreamers as Obama ever was. Or he's about to legalize that many dreamers. So Kimmel decides that he's going to do this routine where he has a bunch of people who oppose DACA meet a dreamer family. Right? He's going to have a bunch of people who oppose DACA meet a dreamer family. And this is how again, this is talk about bias in the media. This is it in spades.
This is Esmeralda, and this is her daughter, Rose. And Esmeralda came here. How old were you when you came to this country?
I was 2.
You were 2 years old. Your parents brought you here from where?
Mexico City.
From Mexico City.
Yes.
You have a baby now.
Yes.
And you are a DACA recipient. You signed up. You did a background check.
Yes.
You were fingerprinted. You have a job.
Yes.
You pay taxes.
Yes.
You go to nursing school.
Yes.
How many of you think it would be right for Esmeralda to be sent back to Mexico, a country that she's never known?
Okay, and the idea here is to show how mean these guys are. And of course, two of the people who are there are wearing Trump hats, right? One is wearing a hat that says "Make California Great Again," and another one is wearing a hat that says "Make America Great Again." And of course, it's two white guys who kind of look slovenly. And this is the idea, that it's a bunch of racists who want to do this, and then a woman who's raising her hand as well. There's a black woman in the audience who's not raising her hand, and 2 other women. So the females are the moral voices in this panel. Now, you can point out that there are dreamers who listen. Would I send Esmeralda back? I wouldn't. I mean, so long as she's of benefit to the American society. But you can be in favor of a policy and still know that there are sympathetic people who may be hurt by the policy. And that happens all the time. Right? I'm in favor, for example, of getting rid of Obamacare. Are there people who benefit from Obamacare? Clearly, there are some people who benefit from Obamacare. Am I in favor of getting rid of Obamacare? I am. And the reason I'm in favor of getting rid of Obamacare is because I think that over the broad swath of human beings, it will be better for America to get rid of Obamacare than to maintain Obamacare. But this is the way the media bias is the case. Is would they ever do this with a bunch of people for sanctuary cities? Like, would Jimmy Kimmel ever have a bunch of left-wing activists from San Francisco sit there and talk to the families that Donald Trump mentioned during the State of the Union address? Ever? Would that ever happen? Would he ever just have the 2 families? Remember, there are the 2 black families whose daughters were murdered by an illegal immigrant. Would he ever have those families confront people who are fans of sanctuary cities? Of course not. Of course not. This sort of media bias is what frustrates so many people on the right, and it's what I think wrongly allows them to engage in a reactionary politics where they say that all news is fake news or deride anything the media ever say. But when members of the media do this routine, particularly members of the cultural media do this, it makes us all nuts. And it should make us all nuts. Because it's sad to say, but Jimmy Fallon, who's the most apolitical of the hosts, has fallen in the ratings specifically because he is the most apolitical of the hosts. Because left-wingers are now tuning into Jimmy Kimmel to get their feel-good moment for their leftist politics in a way that they are not for Jimmy Fallon. I'm not a fan of either Kimmel or Fallon. In fact, I think Kimmel is funnier than Fallon. But I think that apolitical comedy is going by the wayside here, and that's simply too bad. So, again, I think that this is just more evidence of a media that's biased. They hold up, they set up situations deliberately in order to achieve certain results. I talked about this a little bit on Dave Rubin's show with Jordan Peterson yesterday, what the media do in order to gain results. And that's why people like me, people like Jordan, people like Sam Harris, we may all disagree on politics, but if we refuse to accept the bait that the media are presenting, if we refuse to acknowledge the situation that the media are putting us in order to try and drive us to a certain conclusion, we're seen as outliers. And this is, I think, why there are so many people who